Okay, so welcome to another 15-minute Feature Friday. Today we're going to look at a new feature in 2019 R2, device password management. But before we jump into that feature directly, we should probably talk a little bit about passwords in general. And what I'd like to start with is some kind of interesting stats that I found. So the first thing that was really interesting is 81% of hacking-related breaches leveraged either a stolen or a weak password. That means that 4 out of 5 of the breaches or hacks that have happened are because people are using shared passwords, or they're using duplicate passwords, they're using weak passwords, right? Another interesting fact that I found was that 47% of people using passwords that are at least 5 years old. It means half of us are using a password that is over 5 years old. It's not a great practice. It's even scarier is 1 in 5 of us are actually using one that's 10 years old. And I kind of mentioned before, the stat is that there's about 3/4 of us that use the same password in multiple locations. So if I bank at Wells Fargo and I use Gmail and I use the same password on both, we're really creating a security breach, a possibility for a security breach in both locations. If they hack one, they now have access to the other. So those are some kind of those scary stats that let you know that just how impactful good passwords are, right? And if you look on the right-hand side, this is from 2018. These are the most hacked passwords, and they are some of the most used passwords out there. So if you see your password on this list, it's probably time to change it. I would highly recommend that. So not to be so that we don't become a stat, what can we do, right? What are the best practices around this? Well, and a lot of this will be rehashed. I'm sure most of you have heard it. First thing we can do is create a strong password, right? Strong password makes it significantly more difficult for hackers to crack or break into our systems or devices. And so when you're creating a password, there's a couple of things that you really need to pay attention to, right? If you want a strong password, it's got to be at least 8 characters in length. That's what they say. Longer is better. And it should consist of numbers, letters, special characters. All right, so you think you got a strong password, but you're not positive. There's actually some apps out there on the web. I've actually got one here that will allow us to actually test whether our password is strong. So I picked one that's available on every Access camera out there. It's what it comes with, right? Username's root, password is pass, right? Really should change that when we get that camera. And so that we're not using a weak password. So you can see here, I've typed that in, and you can see that the length is too short. It's a common password. We should be using mixed letters. We should be using uppercase and lowercase. We should be using numbers and symbols, and we should avoid repeated characters. So then I thought, well, what happens if I just change this? I mean, it's not a great password, but if I were to change this to something that was a little more secure, right? And now, if I look at that, I've got a very strong password. So this is a great little tool just to make sure that the passwords that you're using are complex enough and end up being very strong. So the other thing that they tell us is you should be using different passwords for different accounts and devices. We just talked about that in the last slide, where about 3/4 of us use the same password at least in 2 different locations. Not a great practice, right? So if we do use different passwords on every account and every device we have, we create another problem, especially if they're strong passwords, and that is we're going to really test our memory. And if we're going to, and especially if those are strong passwords, you know, I'm sure you've got more than a couple of accounts that you need to remember passwords for. So the next recommendation is, hey, use a password manager, right? It's good practice. You have to remember one really good password, and let the password manager do the rest for you. There's some really good ones out there. I personally use LastPass, but there's KeePass, Password Safe, and Dashlane. All of them offer a free version. They're all pretty effective, and they allow you to manage passwords across your platforms, right? So just for fun, I kind of took a look at my account with LastPass, and I was curious, well, how many different locations am I using a password? How many different accounts do I use? And I have 238 different locations that I use a password, right? It'd be impossible for me to remember 238 different passwords for those accounts. So something like a password manager is really key to that. So I went a little bit further in there and I wanted to see, okay, well, they say don't use duplicate passwords. Am I doing that? And they've got a little utility that goes through your passwords and lets you know if you have any duplicates. Good thing is about 98% of those have different passwords. I've got a couple that still have them, but I'm going to fix that here fairly soon so that I'm using a different password on every account. Next thing is change your passwords regularly, right? So it used to be that they'd say, hey, change your password at least every 90 days. 60 days is even better, and 30 days is great, right? That's a lot of work to do. And if you actually look at the NIST website now, they actually say it may not be as important as we once thought, right? But it's still good to change it from time to time. We don't want a 5-year-old password. We definitely don't want a 10-year-old password. But we still want to change that password from time to time. Key indicators that you need to change it, you've shared it with somebody. It's time to change it. You're seeing suspicious activity, like you're getting extra spam in your email, or you open your email and it looks like you've already read stuff that you know you haven't read. You've probably been hacked, right? Time to change it, not only in that location, but probably time to change it across the platform. Something I see within Milestone, right? I'll go to a customer site. We'll log onto their system. We'll take a look at their cameras. Every single camera is using the same password. So we're not following those strong best practices in order to make sure that our systems are safe. And we already kind of talked about do not share your passwords. So with that being said, we can now jump into the actual feature and what it does. So Milestone Device Password Management currently supports just a few camera brands, Axis and Bosch, but it also supports ONVIF compliant devices. Now there'll be others as they go along. It's a device pack related feature, so as those get developed, more and more will come along. I'm pretty sure Hanwha is the next one that's coming aboard. It does require that you have 2019 R2 or later, and it does require that you're using at least device pack 10.3 or later. So if you have those couple of things, you're good to go. The next, the nice part about it is it allows you to either manage by single device, so we can go into a single camera and we can change a password, or we can select a group of devices and change the password across them all at the same time. We can also change those manually, so we can then go in there and select our password. We can put it in what we want it to be, or we can use the password generator that's been built into the feature, which means that it's going to select it. Now, if we're using that automatic password generator, it's going to use the manufacturer's password rules, right? Some manufacturers are going to require or are going to be limited to 32 characters in the password. Some are going to be 64. Some are going to require letters and numbers. Some are going to require special characters, right? So it's going to know that. That's going to be part of the driver. And when you set up those passwords automatically, it's going to follow those guidelines. So great little feature, and probably time to take a look at it, right? So with that said, here we go. Let me pull it up. Oh, passed it right up. All right, so I've got my 2019 R2 management client, and so we were talking about being able to manage a camera at a time, okay? So I'm gonna go over here to my Axis P3225, and if I go over here, you'll see you have a new selection called Change Hardware Password. All right, once we select that, we get this nice window, and we have a couple options, right? We can set our own password. Okay, and I'm using a really weak one. Of course, you'll get this little dialog box. Once it comes up, we're good. All right, and we get a refresh here. Hopefully nothing crashes. There we go. All right, so then we've changed that password. I can actually take a look at what that password is through, of course, Edit Hardware. And over here, you'll see a little kind can I look at it? So I just change it to pass, right? So that's one way we can approach it. Okay, the other thing that we can do is we can do it in a group. So if we select here and we go, we select the actual recording server and we go to change hardware password, we now get we get the same dialog box, but we now get a different selection. Now, I purposely threw a handwa on this test system just so you can see that it's not currently supported and you can see what it looks like currently. So my only options to select are this ONVIF compliant encoder, and then my 2-axis cameras. The handwa's got a warning symbol just because we can't do anything with it. So from here, I can select all the ones that are available. I can select one or multiple. And for this demonstration, I'm going to do all of them, right? So I selected all of them. I'm going to go ahead and let it generate the passwords. Okay, so I let it generate the passwords, and it's going to go through and update all of those. Okay, once again, we get the little flash. All right, and then we're back on, and so now we can go in and take a look at each one of these. And what's kind of interesting is if we go in and edit the hardware, we can take a look here and see that it has put a really strong password. If I take that and go over to that website, it's going to come up very, very strong. It's going to follow the rules of that ONVIF device, and you can see that it's not going to be something out of a dictionary, something that's easy to remember. It's managed here, right? So the other thing that you can notice is if I go to the next device, not only is it longer in length, but it's completely different. It's going to change depending on the device that you're attaching to. So in this case, all 3 of those devices that I added the password to have different passwords. They're all strong, and they're all managed by the management client. All right, so let's say, for example, that we have a contractor. We've done this, right? We have a contractor coming in to work on our large system. We got 300-400 cameras, and we want them to work on the access cameras. Okay, they're going to go up and update firmware. Well, trying to give them the passwords for all those cameras is kind of crazy. So what I would do is I would probably go back into the utility here, and I'd say, hey, for my access cameras, I'm just going to change that back for now to pass, right? So we change it back to pass. Now they've got easy access to those cameras. They can do the updates, do what they need to. Once that's done, we of course come back to this utility, and we can change it back to something strong again. So very handy utility. It kind of hits all of the main best practices. You know, it creates a strong password. We're using different passwords on each of the devices. We're using a password manager that's now incorporated into the management client. We have the ability now to change passwords on a regular basis, and it's not difficult. So we remove that barrier, and literally, we don't have to share the passwords anymore. We can change them, let them go work on it, and change them to something strong again. That's really the feature. If there's any questions at this point, I saw that Joe had one there, and it is, in the event you are using ONVIF compliant camera with a dedicated driver, this is not Axis or Bosch, will it still work? So as long as it's an ONVIF compliant camera, and of course we're using device pack 10.3, it should work. Is there any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me. Have a great weekend, and look forward to talking to you guys in the next FMFF.